Good evening. Have you ever felt that unexpected, overwhelming wave of emotion that just washes over your body and you can't think anymore and you just react in an automatic second? I call that when we're triggered and something is pushing our buttons. Now, sometimes when we're deeply triggered, we can respond pretty effectively, even without thinking. But if you're like me, it's happened 2, maybe 3 times in my entire life. Most of the time when we're triggered, we react in ways that have negative consequences for ourselves and for others. It is so common, so easy to feel triggered, especially in the workplace. Can you relate? See if you can relate to these 3 quick ideas. Have you ever been in a meeting and your supervisor is talking about a project that you worked long and hard on and then starts taking all the credit for your work? Have you ever been overlooked for a promotion and you realize the person they hired was younger than you and someone that you've been mentoring and supervising for several years? Or you were chastised for speaking up in a meeting, just raising your voice, asking a question, when people who look like, talk like, and act like the boss get rewarded and praised for that same behavior and told they've got leadership potential. Now, you're probably thinking about other times you felt triggered, am I right? And so in those moments, have you ever felt any of these 4 stress reactions? They're all ineffective. Have you ever gone into fight mode when that anger comes up over you and you just say things without a filter and later you're like, ooh, I shouldn't have done that? Or you move into the flight mode, you get so scared you shut down. And you're so scared, you're like, just get me out of here. Now, I often freeze, the deer in the headlight. Anybody else? Thoughts, feelings are swirling so much, just overwhelming, and I don't know what to do. And then the 4th one is a new one I've been talking about lately, and that's flounder. You're like, all right, I'm going to do something. You try something, that doesn't work. You try something else, that doesn't work. And you end up stumbling around, incredibly ineffective. It doesn't have to be this way. Even when we're deeply triggered, we can react very effectively, advance the goals of the organization, and help people learn and grow. But it takes a lot of skills. And most of the time, we say things we later regret. And so, I'd like us all to take a deep breath, because that's one of the first skills. Because when we don't breathe and we say things we regret, we often escalate the tension and all of the dysfunction in the room. We often find we damage relationships that are very hard, trust me, very hard to repair in the workplace. And we undermine our core values and the organizational goals. Now, I find that stories help me take concepts and really learn them. So I want to tell you a story about one of my clients, Julie. And this is going to be a before and after story where she was really knocked out for her game in a triggering event. She called me up and told me about how she'd been really anxious. She had to go do a presentation for her vice president in the boardroom, no less. And she was nervous because he was a tough guy to work with. And so she'd planned it out. She planned to get there 15 minutes before so she could get all settled in the room, get her slides, go over them. And so she gets up the boardroom door, she opens the door, and her first shock is she sees her vice president there. He's never there on time. But she takes a deep breath. She knows he's talking to somebody. So she goes in, she looks over, he's talking to Mike. Now, she had invited Mike to the meeting, somebody that she supervises. She was trying to give him a little help in his career, but she never expected him to get there before she was there, and she soon realized she never expected him to start talking about the project before she even got in the room. So she was already pretty triggered by the time she sat down, but she took another deep breath, got her slides all set up, did a little chit-chat, small talk so she could get centered, and she started. Now, she was a little shaky when she started, but after a while, she got in the flow, and she was feeling pretty good. And she knew the next section would really nail it. 4 key points to show how the organization is going to benefit and how this leader is going to look good. And so she's moving in that section, and then out of blue, the vice president abruptly interrupts her, says, I don't like that idea, turns to Mike, her direct report, and said, Mike, how are you going to fix this? Well, she is just overwhelmed and furious. This wave is just washing her all away. She looks over at Mike, she sees him talking, but she can't hear him because all she hears is the beating of her heart and the ringing in her ears. And all she feels is just so frustrated as she has these thoughts spinning. She's thinking of her vice president, what a jerk, what a sexist, he can't handle strong women. And she looks back at Mike, who's still talking, expecting him to send the conversation back to her So she's like, what are you trying to do? You're trying to undermine my job? You're trying to take my job? You're trying to make me look bad? And so she is spinning so bad in that moment. She can't think what to do. In that moment, she chose fear over courage. And it took her several minutes to get back in her body enough to get centered so that she could see what was going on. But by then it was too late because they'd start talking about the football game next Sunday. And she's frustrated again because she's like, we've got work to do. So she turned to the VP and she said, well, I just have a few more slides. Mike interrupts and said, well, we've already talked about that. There's a problem with what we're doing, so we'll figure that out in the next couple of weeks and we'll all come back together. And she gives Mike the look. I mean, you know the look. It's like, and I hope you can't lip read in this moment. And so she turns to the vice president and said, I just have a couple slides. He gives her the hand. You know the hand? As he's picking up his iPhone and headed to the door. And she sees Mike running after the vice president. And she's sitting there defeated, deflated, so disappointed in herself that she couldn't do anything differently. And I wish it ended there. But you know when you're triggered and you're exhausted and you're feeling just deflated, that's when the whispers get louder. You know what I mean about those whispers? Those voices, those negative thoughts in the back of our head. And so she started then spinning even more. I'm not good enough. I don't know how to do this. Maybe Mike is a better leader. Why did they ever hire me? Did I just get the job because I'm a woman? And she just sat there spinning. Can you relate? Yep. But it didn't even stop there. She had 2 more meetings that afternoon. She told me I think she remembers being in the meeting, but she said I wasn't present. I had this whole emotional cloud and fog, and I just was spinning, doing the woulda, coulda, wish I had, just replaying it over and over. And she got home and she told the story to her partner, and she found at the dinner table she was really snippy and snappy with the kids. And when her partner tried to say, come on, and she was just really mad at them and just ruined the whole evening. Tried to go to sleep, but she couldn't sleep. She was restless all night. So when she finally got to sleep and woke up a few hours later, she had an emotional hangover, went back to the office, but had no energy to be there. Who can relate in the room? When we are deeply triggered, we cannot control other people. But with some skills, some focus, we can learn how to know we're triggered, navigate our emotions, and choose a different response, take back our power to shift those negative dynamics in the workplace. I used to believe that all I needed, just like Julie, was a few more tools in my toolkit. When someone says something inappropriate, cuts me off, is rude, what do? But you see, Julie had those tools. She was a senior leader. She was just so emotionally triggered, she couldn't find her toolkit in the moment. So she needed a whole nother set of tools. She needed to be able to know why in the world she was triggered in the first place. What I've come to believe is that when something happens and our reaction is this big like Julie's, when that moment probably wasn't an easy moment, but probably your emotions could have been just this big, that means something else is going on. And I call these intrapersonal roots. Things in our past, things in our current life that are built up, and they're fueling why our reaction gets so big. Now, Julie didn't understand that when we first talked, but as I asked her some questions, she's like, oh, I think there was something else going on for me. So I had her take a deep breath and close her eyes, and I asked her just to sit with herself as I asked her a couple questions. And I asked, so who does the vice president remind you of? Do you ever remember feeling like you did in that moment? And she took a moment, and all of a sudden, she got this look on her face like, huh. And what she said was, I haven't thought about this in years, decades, but when I was in junior high, I remember I was so excited. I got cast in the lead role of the musical. And I came home and we were sitting at the dinner table and I was telling my dad, and I was halfway through the conversation when he turned abruptly to look at my brother and say, so how was football practice today, son? How's that game going to be? And I just sat there. I didn't know what to do, and I felt dismissed. I said, that's great. That's something from your way past. How about at work? Does Mike, the VP, remind you of anything? We paused, and she said, oh. I remember every time I'd speak in a lot of meetings, or anytime any woman would speak, our ideas would just plop and no one would listen. But as soon as that man in the corner would speak up and say the exact same thing, all of a sudden it was a great idea that he got credit for. I said, that one's great too. So take another deep breath. Just close your eyes. I'll ask one more time. Does anything come up as you ask? As the vice president or Mike, they remind you of anybody? And you could just feel her start to get quiet. And she said, oh, I'm remembering a couple guys, a couple men that used their power, used their privilege and their position to silence me and to get me to do what they wanted to do. And so I just sat there with her for a while because I knew she had hit something pretty deep. What I know is when we're deeply triggered, there's much more going on, and there's a lot of skills we need to learn. It's not that I'm out of control when that vice president interrupts us, right? We can learn some skills, but we had to start at 3 levels. And so when I worked with Julie, we started with the tools that most people want, and that's when other people do things that are really obnoxious, what can I do? And so I taught her those skills. So she had the toolkit, she felt comfortable, she knew what she was doing. And then I said, but how are you going to know if you're triggered? She's like, oh. And so we did some of that work. Because when you're triggered, that's when you can do your thought work. And the critical skill for her was change your thought, change your reaction. Because she thought that she just would automatically respond and she had no control. But as we practiced, we went back and role-played every situation with that vice president and several others, found those negative thoughts that she had, and we shifted in them the moment she learned the skills so that she was confident the next time she felt triggered, I can notice I'm triggered, find my negative thoughts and shift them. And then I said, but that's if you know you're triggered, because if you're so deeply rooted and those things get re-triggered in the moment, you may not even know you're triggered. So let's now do the 3rd level of skill, and that's how to heal your intrapersonal roots. So that's what we did. We did the healing work. And we went back to those times, the dinner table, at work, those men, and we reworked those, we revisited them, did some healing work, so they no longer were a strong charge for her. And so when she imagined her vice president interrupting her, he was no longer a distracting trigger, just an inconvenience. So we did all that work, and just in time, because it wasn't but a week or 2 later, I get a call from Julie. She says, Kathy, you will not believe this. I said, what? She said, I'm having deja vu. Remember that story I told you? I'm like, could I forget it? And she's like, yeah, well, the same thing happened, but it had a different ending because I was different. She said, I said, well, tell me more. She's like, well, you can probably predict it. I was in a meeting, but this time the vice president and all his directs that happened to all be men were sitting there, and we're supposed to each tell about a new initiative in our area. So a couple guys went, he loved them, and then it was my turn, and I knew it was coming. So I took a deep breath, like you said, and I started telling initiative, and predictably, he interrupted me, said, I'm not sure about this, turned to the men and said, what are your concerns? Well, of course, they followed his lead and started telling their concerns. I felt a wave of irritation, but I remembered, change your thought, change your reaction. So I took a deep breath, and I made sure I paused before I said anything, and I said, now what am I thinking? And I changed that, what a jerk, what a sexist. And I said, wait, he's got concerns. All right, he's the vice president. Why don't I interact with him, find out what his concerns are, and maybe we can work something out. So I took another deep breath. I got a little centered, and I came back in the meeting, and I noticed this guy over here was still talking. So I watched him until he was about to take a breath, because I knew that was my moment. He took a breath, and I moved right in. I looked at that vice president, and I said, I hear you've got some concerns. Let's talk about them. Tell me what they are, and I'll finish my presentation as we talk. And she did. And by the end of that meeting, that vice president was on board. And she had changed 2 or 3 ideas. And they were pretty good, she thought. And because the vice president was on board, then all the other folks were on board. They got in line, and so she was able to implement that project in record time, and it really advanced the organization pretty quickly. Now, the best part was, she goes, Kathy, you will not believe this. She said, at the end of the meeting, I actually was turned and talking to my colleague, and everyone else pretty much has left, but the VP was still over there. And so I'm closing up, and I say goodbye to him. I say goodbye, and he says, gives me the nod, you know the nod. He says, good job. That was the first time ever he'd done anything like that. When Julie first came to work with me, she could never have imagined that in triggering difficult situations, she could have responded any differently than shutting down, pulling away, and getting small. But now she felt empowered. And that time in that meeting, she decided she could choose courage over fear. She spoke up, she reclaimed her power, she found her voice, and she intervened in a way that helped the group dynamic shift to create greater productivity, greater inclusion. So the next time you feel triggered, I want you to pause before you say anything. Take a deep breath, come on. And then remember 3 things, and remember to do them. 1, pause, breathe, and then remember, change your thoughts, you change your reactions. And just like Julie, find those negative thoughts, shift them, so you de-escalate your emotions, you're more grounded in the moment, you find your toolkit, and you choose how you want to respond. So you take back your power and be the leader you were meant to be. Thank you very much.